and welcome to the Arabic Hour. My name is Ghanwa Hakim. On today's program, we have with us Elaine Hagopian interviewing Greg Thomas, Associate Professor at Tufts University, and Nidal Al-Azraq, Program Coordinator for Lajit Center in Aida Camp, Bethlehem.
You know, and they see the occupation in front of them to resist. So resistance it comes naturally in these type of circumstances.
In fact, it's their only alternative.
I see, yes.
It's their only alternative.
Yeah.
The problem with the little attention that they get for burning the wall and bringing it down is that it gives justification to Israel, or people who don't understand what's going on, to say, well, these are terrorists and we have to take care of this, and and the separation wall is there for the security of Israel, as opposed to really depriving Palestinians. And so the issue I would like you to address, but I'd like to get back to Greg, is to what extent is there any strategy at all, or any planning at all, between the residents that were in Palestine on the West Bank and the refugees who are also Palestinians, but from in what has become known as Israel proper, the conquered territories of 1948. Is there any kind of strategy? But let me get back to Greg, and then I also remind me that we want to talk about surveillance. Tell me a little bit about the issue for single mothers, and also what happens to the dads. But the single mothers have to deal with the children and saving the children, and educating the children, and supporting them in every way. So give us some examples.
They're responsible for everything.
Yes.
For everything. I grew up with, well, it's interesting because I still want to decontaminate our language, right, from the settlers' myths, right? So I grew up raised by my mother, but I'm also raised by 4 aunts in a giant extended black family, right? So how does the U.S. world, right, and the world of the school, look at me? They look at us as a broken family or a deficient, family, whatever, because all they see is the absence of a father that they want to be there in this middle-class colonial movement, right? They don't see the presence, right, of the abundance, of my family, or the fact that I have 5 mothers, right? And therefore 3 more parents than the middle-class child of the
In many ways, the black community is more fortunate in that than the white, poor communities that have the same problem but not support.
This is true. This is true. I wouldn't trade that for anything in the world. We'd be going to war if someone tried to make me adopt a 2-parent middle-class and nuclear family, in exchange for what I grew up with, right, with a mother and 4 aunts, who were even more important than the 5 uncles that I had, for example. And the fact that I lived in Washington, D.C., but we still had a familiar network that ranged from D.C. to deep into Virginia, where my aunts and uncles and my mother were born and raised, right? So I go to school from my mother's house, right? The Western middle class construct of fatherhood, was not a real construct for us. It's not one culturally, really, especially at the class level. At the same time, it's also not one that would be materially supported, right? So that if we wanted it, we couldn't have it, right? But also, it's not a universal thing, right, that we necessarily find desirable. And so, but that does mean that economically speaking, in particular, right, in terms of social responsibilities, that these mothers are responsible for a lot. Are responsible for a lot. The parenting responsibilities are not a choice, for them, right? No one can pat them on the head and say, "Oh, it's good that you're involved in your child's life." When people say that about men, I was like, if my mother were involved in my life, we'd all be dead. If she were involved, what does that mean? Involved, right? So this means that we wake up. So I would, for example, I would wake up. My mother would be rushing off to work. She would make food for us, and then I would actually go to my aunt's house and go to school, from my aunt's house with my cousins, right, and come home and go there, right. They would put all these things in place, at the same time. So they were working low-end jobs 40 hours like a week. Some people may have like 2 jobs, as it turns out, like arranging for childcare. And all of those responsibilities are all the more important to recognize when you realize what they're doing to put you in place where, right? So they're doing all of this work to put you in a school that defines you as a problem and a danger. Mm-hmm. That defines you as trouble itself, as trouble incarnate, right? And so, because they're not the settler image of soccer moms, like, and what have you, this also means that, it's cost them a lot to go to the school to deal with the problem of the school itself. It costs them a lot. They may not have the time, right? Mm-hmm. Or the time costs them, right? And what have you. Or, it's a whole different story, right? Like, I grew up in the era of like the PTA meeting, right? Which was structurally foreign, right? To us. It wasn't possible, like, for most like single mothers, to have that abundance of excess time, right? And lack of responsibility to just be able to go like to school, right? And have the kinds of meetings that they wanted, to have, right?
I mean, it's amazing that Black communities, especially in urban areas, can find anything in the educational system that's meaningful.
Yeah.
Considering that you are considered a problem, and that there is a great deal of surveillance, it's very depressing. And so many drop out because they don't see anything in the future that this kind of education.
Yeah, I stayed and I got a PhD, but it never made any sense. It never. It was an irrational choice, like all along, to remain. I remember that vividly.
What would be the alternative, however?
The alternative, for example, I think this is why alternative schooling is so important to so many Black communities and Black, pedagogical figures, like, and what have you. This is why Black people are always struggling to build our own schools. Right.
Yes, you lost a lot actually as a result of whatever good came out of the civil rights movement. You lost a lot.
We lost a ton.
Yeah,
and some of this is like the Black struggle in the United States. It's always trying to regain, knowledge, right, of what we were and what we've known before, and to regain, material as well as ideological structures, right? The fact of them, and then to rebuild, right? It's that dialectic, constantly. And so we see that. I mean, this is how like Black people can engage in things that may have an existence in white society, but do so very differently. So when Black people talk about homeschooling, it's something very different, right? Or building like our own schools, very, very different.
Very different
for these particular reasons, exactly.
I think one point that should be made, because culture and expression, I think, represents a quality of a people, and also expresses their grief and their joys. And the only original culture to come out of North America is from the Black community, because culture for North Americans have basically come out of either Latin America and the Spanish colonial system, or it came out of Europe. So you have classical music, and you have popular, but it's basically European focused.
Yes.
The culture which the Black community has developed in music, and poetry, and art, and everything.
Yes.
Is the only original culture, and people flock to hear the jazz and blues, and they flock to see the performance of these magnificent people.
Right.
While at the same time that segregation really is still there.
Yes, and in the contemporary sense, right, where everything Black becomes the common culture, like, of America, right, with no recognition of race, like, or racism, or this cannibalization, or the bastardization, the commodification and what have you. And so, in the same era, so now in the hip hop era, right, Black popular culture, it remains the same, right? So the gentrifiers right now speak a language that's not supposed to be like Black, from all their colloquial existence, whether it's language, or they're just like, they want, international restaurants, or gentrified soul food and what have you. So the cops are there to kill the Black people out of your
Yes.
self-division, right? But then you can speak the slang, you can eat the food.
You can take everything from black culture
Yes.
except the black people.
Yes, and that's the only definition of post-racial, right? Eliminate black people, but keep all the products that you want. That's post-black.
Let me get back to Nidal, and again, I do want to get to surveillance. Nidal, I asked you a question about, is there any kind of planning or cooperation? Of course, there is no real leadership at a national level. The Palestinian authorities there, and they've been killed off, and the one person they keep talking about is Marwan Barghouti, and he's in jail, and I'm not sure that he would be the leader. But is there any attempt between local leaderships, between villages and the refugee camps, to strategize or plan or how to deal with the occupation?
In 48. Yeah. This new generation, especially in 48, that for the past 4 or 5 years that's coming out aggressively to challenge the state of Israel.
And these are the ones who still live in what is called Israel.
What is called Israel.
Yeah.
For example, I will give you an example. For example, the Nakba Day, and the Land Day, which it is known to be a big thing in 48 right now. And I have been in one of these demonstrations where I see the Palestinian flag. I will see 50 and 100 of them in Haifa in these demonstrations, in what's called Tel Aviv or Jaffa or in the north, in the Galilee, which something really considered a big threat for Israel, for the idea of Israel. Now, where's the coordination between the Palestinians in 48 and Palestinians in 67? And these young generations are trying to build this bridge, really, but they have been facing a huge challenge by Israel and by the Palestinian Authority, to the point where anyone, for example, will support BDS on Facebook inside Israel will be arrested. On Facebook. So many arrests.
Boycott, divestment, and sanctions for our audience.
That's true. But this young generation, wherever they're trying to break this barrier between what's called 48 and the West Bank, to have this unified body, because if you look at the Palestinians who live inside Israel right now, they not only considered to be a second class or discriminated against. I mean, if you go to a place like Jaffa, Hay al-Ajami in Jaffa, it's worse than Aida camp.
Yes.
It's because of the segregation, because of the
and of course Jaffa was a major Arab city.
Oh yes.
And initially, after most of them were pushed out.
So most of the leadership, to answer your question, is coming out of this young generation. All the old leadership, to be quite honest with you, is somehow corrupted in the mind and strict with this corrupted
No,
politics.
nothing comes out of it.
Nothing comes out of it. However, this young generation is coming out with this enormous energy and trying to find the link and the bridge between the two groups is being fought and challenged by Israel and the Palestinian Authority somehow, in some extent. For example, if you see the last marathon that happened in Bethlehem, the yearly marathon, you will see the number of Palestinians from 48 participating in this marathon. You'll be really surprised. This has never happened like before. If there is a demonstration in the Negev, in Al-Araqib, against house demolitions, you see the support in the Palestinian streets. To shape this, to really try to shape this, and unifying the two groups, it is one Palestinian group, to unify over one umbrella. One thing you need to do is to fire the PLO leadership and to renew them. Because if you look at the PLO, they should be the representative of all Palestinians in the world.
They're not.
They're not. They're not only not alien. They're like AP, and they're like, they have to retire. They have to get out of this position. And I'm afraid to say that we need an alternative to the PLO. If we failed as Palestinians to really renew and rebuild the PLO with young blood and young folks from not only the West Bank or 48 or Jerusalem, from all over the world, Palestinians, because PLO represents all Palestinians in the world, I would say just to kill it and try to kill the Palestinian Authority and find an alternative. And this is the only way I see to unify Palestinians. If you noticed, since last October, last year, 80% of the Palestinian actions against settlers, against Israeli army in the West Bank or in Jerusalem or everywhere, none of them, the majority of them, let's not exaggerate, the majority of them were not claimed by political movements.
That's right.
It's a normal reaction. Palestinians, the Palestinian state, they need a new body, a new movement with a new vision and a goal.
And
the only way to do that is, I think, you cannot go with Fatah or Hamas or Islamic Jihad or even the left movement, the PLP, because these movements somehow failed the Palestinian streets, and the Palestinians really need something new. And this body is not yet been found, to be quite honest with you.
People had talked about trying to rebuild the PLO, but that hasn't happened. And when you get an institution that basically has vested interests in the existing system, I mean, they benefit from cooperating with Israel.
That's true.
They benefit.
With the VIP,
you can't rehabilitate them. You do have to build something new. And I think that the interesting part here is that the Israelis, when they put pressure on Palestinian citizens of Israel and deny them equal rights and deny them everything, they are pushing them to Palestinian resistance.
And this is what's happening right now, Elaine. This is exactly what's happening in 48, because Palestinians in 48, especially the young folks, realize that Israel won't leave them alone. They will come after them. They will, and they are coming after them. But one thing about the leadership, I think, if you look at the geography and the demography of the West Bank, Elaine, and we need to talk about Gaza. Gaza is part of Palestine, of course. Palestinians live on only around 10% of the land, and this 10% is not one unit, divided like open-air prisons. And the land is shrinking. Israel is going full speed with settlements, So in no time, Palestinians will explode. This is what's happening, is not an explosion. What's happening right now is not really a major thing. Maybe it feels big from outside, but not yet. But soon Palestinians will find themselves in a position that they have no choice to explode against who, what kind of style or methods they will use, I don't know. But there's no way they cannot handle this incarceration and pressure and lack of everything almost,
And you have no place to go, you burst out.
That's it.
I mean, I think it's important to know for our audience that the West Bank is broken up into three pieces by the Oslo Agreement, and 60% of it is under Israeli control, and 20% is under joint Palestinian Authority.
That's true.
And 20% is supposedly under Palestinian Authority. The problem is the Palestinian Authority is useless and under the control of Israel. And the settlements have broken the area into pieces along with the wall. So when you're pushing citizens on the one hand by denying them equal rights, and you're also making it impossible in the 67 territories for people to live, get to their land to make a living, you are going to see an explosion. And the Israeli response has been always use more force.
Elaine, you know this very well, that if you look back to the 1989 and 1919, and you look at the Zionist plan and what they have planned for Palestine, and if you go through the history of the Zionist plans, you see them going based on their plan.
It was absolutely...
and we'll be naive to believe or think that Israel will hand back the West Bank or Area C or Area B.
They will not. I think it should be.
So based on this, as a Palestinian, as everybody, what do you mean by two states or negotiation or all of these things or
Right.
peace? Even peace doesn't
Yes.
make sense right now because there is a fact on the ground. It's proven by everything that Israel won't withdraw the settlements, won't take down the wall, won't hand out Area C, which is 62% of the West Bank. With all these facts, what kind of a conversation are we having now? I don't understand.
No, I mean, I think it's clear, but people haven't yet understood it outside of the area.
Yeah.
That the Zionism intended to really take over everything, which they have.
They have.
And they didn't go to all that trouble to give it back. So
Right.
there is no negotiators. It's all a playing game. And when you began to get some talk again here by some so-called practical Jewish people who favor Israel, that they are going to come up with a new plan. Somehow it also involves Jordan, 2 states and whatever. And Netanyahu immediately said he's in favor of a 2-state solution. And it's all just for public consumption.
That's
It's just not going to happen. And so people are going to resist. But they have to resist enough so that, as I see it, as I analyze it, that outside forces really see it as something threatening, threatening to their interests, so that there is some outside pressure. And in the meantime, Palestinians have to survive on the land. Let me get back and make this a final question on this segment, and then go on to some of your work that you're doing now, both of you, in your communities. But I think it's very important to understand the issue of surveillance. Surveillance is usually done by any government. Ordinarily, we think of keeping records on the citizens, registering them and counting how many are employed and what the age group is and where they live and what skills they have, is to be able to provide services to them. Ordinarily, that is the theory. In fact, we know in this country that surveillance has been used for monitoring communities, the black community in particular, Muslim communities now. But in Palestine, it is so detailed and refined, and that every means possible, from the permit to the ID card, to the technology, to the drones, to every aspect of life.
To the bedroom, to the kitchen.
To the bedroom, to the kitchen, to everything.
To everything.
So that, and it's not used to improve people's life, it's used to control them.
To control
So-
them and to pose a threat, a huge threat on them as well. Yeah.
Yes.
You are watching the Arabic Hour. Our guests today are Greg Thomas and Nidal Al-Azraq. We'll be back with more after this short program ID.
You are watching the Arabic Hour, a program of news, views, culture, cuisine, and the Arab American experience. To view today's program or any previous programs, log on to our website at www.arabichour.org.
Talk a little bit about how your communities feel the surveillance and in what ways they suffer from it.
Well, it's interesting, right? Because now what we're getting to know is super high-tech repression,
Yes.
right? The U.S. is a surveillance society, a surveillance with a surveillance culture, and this is what distinguishes this period of history and this empire from previous empires. These are high-tech, super high-tech empires. In this particular case. And so you have a whole surveillance society, right, before we begin to talk about different subjects of this society, right? So even one of the things that gentrification does is that it scales up surveillance. So all the cafes have multiple cameras that nobody notices, right? There's a group that did a study of Oakland where they went to all these gentrification cafes, right, that had taken over land in the city, and most of these places had 6 or 7 surveillance cameras, and nobody notices, right, and what have you. And then, of course, we have the things that are in the news. You have the NSA and the whole issue like with cell phone records and what have you. And this is the blanket that covers like this whole portion of the planet and all portions of the planet that the empire, has its tentacles on, right? That's in general. At the same time, you have the automatic surveillance of black people and black bodies. You have that most primitive surveillance that when you see black skin, right, it magnetizes state attention. It magnetizes citizen-like attention, right, that makes appeal to the state. If I leave this building, and walk the street, everybody pays attention, to my body. Everybody, I can call, the police or act like the cops, with me. So you have that primitive racist, surveillance that is the everyday fabric of life. In quote unquote America, and then you have this new historical level of high tech repression that is merchandise between Zionists of the Israeli construct and the center of world empire in the US. You have that, and then you have new things that we are learning about so we have the older stuff we have the stuff that was created to eliminate the black liberation movement of the 60s and the 70s particularly so when people use COINTELPRO as a shorthand for that, the FBI's counterintelligence program, which was just one of many. We know that one term that's become semi-popularized, but just like there are many surveillance agencies, there were many programs, local and international, to achieve that work, and that work was to literally liquidate and neutralize these liberation figures in the liberation struggle. So when I learned from a Palestinian scholar that the word that Israeli soldiers use when they kill Palestinians in the street is Hebrew for neutralize, I'm like, that was the language of the FBI, to neutralize black struggles here at the same time. So you have those programs, even if we use just one, to reference the whole network of them as shorthand. But you also have new stuff designed or deployed against black communities too, at a local level, that I'm just learning about, especially from younger folk and some students who specialize in this. So all of our phones, are designed, to make us zombies of the state, but then at the same time, for example, in Harlem, there's a program where they, as a part of the normal racism, they're always policing and arresting, black youth, for example, black people in general, and black youth, in particular. And when they false arrest them, sometimes they give them the option of letting them go, or at least this is the pretense, by taking their phones. I say, I'll let you go and not take you to jail if you just give me your phone. And now what do they have? What kind of surveillance, is that? And that's just one, example of what's happening, in general, and then deployed in very particular fashion to black people, especially black people who are young and who are urban and subject to this very specific kind of state repression that black people face.
Some of the surveillance is actually built into the software
Absolutely.
Of your phones and everything else. So.
Yes. And your Facebook, your social media use. Yes.
Nidal, surveillance is extreme. I mean, it's extreme enough here, but it's extreme in Palestine. And given the fact that Palestinians have nowhere to go, and you find more of the 48 people having the same sorts of feelings, they now are so watched and monitored so much by electronic mechanisms, by the use of permits, by the use of city limits and residential and every possible way that they can be counted and understood. How, and now you have physically the wall and the towers and the checkpoints and the area split. How is it possible for Palestinians to actually put up resistance and survive? I mean, every time they resist, they get more of them killed, more of them in jail. So, how does your community in Palestine feel the brunt of the surveillance?
Well, Israel used to rely on the human surveillance, as you know before, the technology, which is the collaborators. Okay? And they still use them because they cannot give up the human surveillance. They rely on them tremendously for information. Israel spends millions and millions every year on this, on surveilling every single aspect of the Palestinian lives, to the point where I travel, I have to go through Jordan, and I will be taking 2 interrogations. And the first thing, the interrogation will be 2-3 hours, 4 hours. The first hour and a half, the interrogator, which is a highly skilled mukhabarat, will tell me about my family. How is your brother? How's his car he bought? Oh, I heard it was broken, for example. How is his children? How is the school? How's your mom? She was sick. Salamitha, etc., etc. They will give you the sense that they know, and they do. Know almost every single thing about you. Why? Because if you, as a Palestinian, got involved in political actions and being arrested, this is where they can break you. No matter how strong you are in the interrogation, and you won't confess on anything, they have so much evidence against you about where did you go, how did you talk, where did you talk, even what did you think about how to act the action. So for Palestinians, they know that they are being watched, and to the point where many Palestinians will ignore the fact and just write whatever they want to write on the internet, on the Facebook, and say whatever they want to write, because they cannot escape it unless they want to build a world under the ground, which the human surveillance will follow them to there. So there's not much options for Palestinians to escape the surveillance system that Israel imposes on them, except to know that if I want to go and throw a stone or do any action against occupation, they know that, yes, they will know, Israel will know, and I will pay the price, even being arrested or killed or being wanted for a certain time, because practically with the civilian technology that Israel has, which they have a very advanced one, they monitor everything in Palestinian lives, which makes it really hard and difficult and even impossible for Palestinians to avoid it. It's just you need to keep up with your life, to keep up with your resistance against the occupation, because you have no other choice. Unless, even if you're talking about, for example, Bethlehem. Bethlehem is a very small area that's surrounded by a chain of settlements, okay? If you will be wanted, commit any political action within the city and want to be wanted, you only have Bethlehem. Because if you try to go outside of Bethlehem, there are checkpoints and settlements and wall. So Bethlehem is a very small city to cover with the surveillance, okay, with the drones, with everything. So I would say surveillance there within Palestinian life. It's strange to say it, but it's part of Palestinian lives to the point where Palestinians know that. And they know it physically, because if you look at the wall around Aida refugee camp, and the tower has a camera, and the camera pointed into the bedroom, where, and this is the Norman Aida camp, at night, many Palestinians in the camp, they close the curtains of the bedrooms and the kitchens. That women, they want to walk in their house without the headscarf, and sometimes do, and they do want. They know that there's a soldier, physical soldier in the watchtower, and there's a camera seeing me, what I cook, what I'm dressed up, and things like that, and they have to close the curtain. And this is like across the street from the bedroom, So Palestinians know that, and they have no choice but to not cope with it, just to ignore it somehow. Ignore it somehow and know that I'm being followed, but this shouldn't stop me from doing what I'm doing.
Well, tell me, and then we'll get on to some of the work that you were both doing in your fields. There are lots of invasions into the Camp Aida from which you come, originally. The Israelis come in with their tear gas and their skunk sprays, this chemical that smells like and spray your houses and so forth. Do they come because they have sensed there's something going on, Or do they come just for the hell of it to remind you all to stay in place and don't do anything? What brings on these attacks? And I think we have a video of one of them.
Yeah.
So go right ahead.
So you know that Palestinians are live objects for training. Okay. In the case of Aida refugee camp, whenever Israel brings a new unit, they need to train it, and it's a perfect opportunity. You have live objects and subjects to come and train on them. So this is most of the coming to the camp, especially at 2 in the morning and 1 in the morning and 3 in the morning. It will be a new unit to train in live action and objects, these soldiers. I remember a month ago, Aida camp woke up at 2 in the morning for a lot of shooting, live ammunition shooting. And because Palestinians sometimes, I don't know how to explain it, naturally they will jump to the rooftop and start, throwing things on the soldiers, and the clash will start. So they thought, the army is occupying the camp. But I mean, they came and they shot so many bullets that like the streets were covered with empty bullets. Okay, and in the news, Israel announced, this was a training in Aida refugee camp at 2 in the morning. Yesterday, they came and they shot 2 kids and they arrested 2 kids, but they came with like tons of Israeli army soldiers, young, confused, scared, and this is the problem. They come scared, and a new unit to train them in the camp.
Yes.
And they stayed there like for 4 hours. 4 hours, like bombs shooting, mud in the streets, tear gas, etc., etc. Sometimes they come when there's demonstrations. Sometimes Palestinians hold demonstrations and start throwing stones and burn tires. Sometimes they come with their machines. The odd thing that I think for American audience, and everybody who lives in the U.S. to know, 80% of what the Israeli soldier is carrying is stamped "Made in USA." And it's not stamped as a fact, no, that M16 is an American product. No, it's written in English, "Made in USA," and Palestinians read English. So Palestinians' views of the U.S. government and the U.S. comes through the Israeli soldier who's coming to their neighborhood to shoot. Every single tear gas canisters is being thrown Palestinians, stamped "Made in USA, Pennsylvania." The factory is in Pennsylvania, in Philadelphia. So this is for American society to know that you are part of the problem. Your tax dollars, you are participating in this mess. Either you like it or not, you are participating.
Given the massive aid we give Israel, military assistance, I mean, it's not...
But it's amazing to me that 80% of what this Israeli soldier is carrying is stamped "Made in USA." That's what the Palestinian experiences from the USA is, that immediate. Yeah.
Let me ask you a quick question, and that is, when they come into the camps, whether it's a training exercise or not, do they then arrest people, take people out just for the hell of it, or do they say we have something on you, or
both? A lot of arrests that if, let's say, 4, 5, 10 people, guys sitting in the street having a political conversation, and one collaborator got a word, I got like a sense that this person has really made a statement and said, "Oh yeah, well, why we're not doing a demonstration tomorrow? Why there's nothing happening tomorrow?" Israel will come immediately, take it very seriously, and arrest this person because they think that, he is thinking, maybe he will act on it, maybe he will do something, and this person will go for interrogation, torture, and take at least 2 to 3 months for only not thinking, for only making a statement in a conversations. Many times when they come to the camp, Elaine, they arrest, for example, they will arrest unwanted people. They will take 3, 4 people with them, because they believe in the collective punishment. For example, when they come and throw tear gas, you know how many tear gas they throw in one day? And they will be surprised.
how many?
200, 300, 400. They will tear gas will make Aida come as a big cloud. Will they come and throw the skunk water? And by the way, again, I'm going to go to the Americans. Israel came to the U.S. and they took a sample of the skunk animal from the U.S. and they added chemical on it and developed it. And this is what they use in Palestinians. So even the skunk water is coming from an animal here in the US. Whatever. When they come and they don't spray the skunk water on the people, on the demonstrators.
They spray it on their houses
The houses.
Oh, wow.
so that it remains.
Because they want the families to rebel against the protesters and to be angry at the people who protest. You know, so it's not only about that, it's also they believe in the collective punishment. I mean, when any Palestinians do an action or an attack or anything, they would come and demolish the house.
And
That's a collective
that's right.
punishment to the family, you know, not only to the person who would be
It's always-
killed or in jail.
It's always been Israel's policy.
That's true.
Let me come now to having Greg talk to us about some of the work you're doing. I mean, there's been a relationship and awareness between Black Americans and Palestinians for a long time, and it's been reignited recently. You have groups, African American groups, going to Palestine and so
Yes.
forth. But you're doing some work on the Black Panther, George Jackson,
Yes.
who was in solitary confinement and who was killed in jail,
Yes.
and who was turned himself into a scholar
Yes,
in the process.
absolutely, yeah.
And you found a book of Palestinian poetry among what was left in his remains in his
Yes.
cell.
Yes.
Tell us what you have been doing, Greg.
Yes. So for a number of years now, I've been working on a book on George Jackson's own writings. And George Jackson is not a figure who has a presence in academia. Almost no presence at all. Almost no presence at all. It's been 45 years
I
since
know
his
Huey
assassination.
Newton does and others do, but not.
Yeah, more or less. The absence of George from academia is almost total. It's almost total.
And yet he was a significant Black Panther
Huge.
leader.
You know, I say, especially, you know, like working in Palestine and on this question, that it puts me in a very strange position to have to reintroduce George Jackson. You know, because if I tried to introduce George Jackson to someone in 1970, I would look like a lunatic, right? Because of his international renown, even from a prison cell at that particular point. And even the Palestinian connection starts there because it was Jean Genet who ended up writing the introduction to George Jackson's first published book, Soul of That Brother. The preface had actually been written first by Huey Newton, and they decided to get Genet, who wrote it from Brazil. And Genet is a figure who defined himself as a partisan, right, of and a fellow traveler with the PLO, like at the time. And as a French literary giant and a former outlaw himself, his last book called Prisoner of Love in English, he was writing a memoir about his time with both the PLO and the Black Panthers, right? So it actually starts from the beginning of George Jackson's like published life, this link.
Okay.
And so I set myself the task of writing a book on George Jackson's writings, not on him as an icon, right? Because today we often get stuck in superficial, like symbolic iconography, and we don't get, you know, praxis. You know, we don't get like ideas, like in the concrete political as well as intellectual aspects of struggle. Instead, we just get symbols and T-shirts, right? Assata taught me without Assata, right? For example, and so we get stuck in the '60s and the '70s, or our most important, for example, our eras of political struggle, right, at the level of ideas as well as action, become just T-shirts, you know, like for us, you know. So it's tragic. So the book work that has been done on George Jackson before. There were a few things before that were all journalistic and that were focused upon the assassination of this figure, but not him as an intellectual figure of a movement in motion, not his praxis. And so I set myself the task, like, of writing a book on George Jackson's writings that continue to mesmerize those of us who read them. And so in doing different kinds of research for this, like one of the things that I came across was a list of books that were seized from his cell. Right, seized from his cell by prison guards with machine guns after his assassination. And the first page that was recovered had a list of 99 books from his prison cell. And like today, only 13 would be allowed, right, in the mainline prison of San Quentin. And in solitary confinement in the adjustment center where he was, only 3 would be allowed today, right? And he had 99 in his cell and more. And some of them were out on loan. More were out on loan to his comrades in prison. I found 2 other pages that showed that there were more books back in the cell. And one of the books on that list was Enemy of the Sun, right? The edited collection by Nasser Arori and Edmund Garib, right? And then it rung a bell for me when I first saw it there. And I dug it up. And of course, it was way out of print. It's still way out of print.
Yes,
I think
it
it's
is.
going to come back
It
soon.
was published by a black press.
It was published by
and the
Jonas Free
poet
Press.
Sam Allen, who died recently.
That's right. He wrote this amazing foreword to the collection.
Yes, he wrote the foreward.
Yes, and I learned from Edmund Garib that the book manuscript had been rejected by no less than 12 presses.
Wow.
Right, who wouldn't do it.
It was translated poetry from mostly Palestinian.
Right,
Arab
mostly 48.
poetry, yes.
Yeah, and mostly 48 Palestinians.
Yes,
it turns
and-
out. So they've been rejected by 12,
Yeah.
publishers. And one publisher had agreed, one editor of a publishing house had agreed, but once he went back to the company, he had to renege on the agreement. And so they ended up being published by a black press.
Yes, I remember when they were doing
when
that.
they were doing it, yes. And so Drum and Spear. So I mean, the connections are like manifold, even in just this one, scenario. But I had known, so I looked up the book, when I first came across this list, because the subtitle wasn't on the list. It was just Enemy of the Sun and the editor's surnames. So I go to Amazon. There's no like icon to show me the cover. I just order it on faith. Used. And then it comes, I'm like, whoa. And also it's amazing. It's just amazing. But I knew from fingering through the pages of the Black Panther newspaper that this title rang a bell. Right? And so the Panthers had actually published the title poem by Sami Al-Qasim. They had published the title poem there, and that's why it rang a bell. And they had mistaken that poem for a poem of George Jackson himself. And so, as it turns out, I mean, we can speculate. It's wrapped in mystery, appropriately enough, right? But we can speculate that that prisoners often like transcribe, texts from books, right, without any identifying information to share.
They're not going to do footnote type things.
Exactly. And also it's contraband, right? So if you want to share contraband material, like one example I've heard is that there are guys, they read stuff once they get out of prison and realize that they'd already read it, right? So some guy like was reading like Capital by Marx, the second chapter. It's like, oh, I read this in prison, I just didn't know what it was, And so it's very possible that he had transcribed poetry by Sami Al-Qasim, and that in his papers, right, seized a few of which were made available to his mother and or his political party, the Black Panthers, might have included a couple of these poems by Sami Al-Qasim in particular, particularly Qasim. And that the Black Panther Party, who published a lot of George Jackson pieces after the assassination, included in September, right before a statement by his mother, right? If you read the September 17th edition, I believe it is, right? You see this inset. It says Enemy of the Sun by George Jackson, right? And then the next page is a giant statement by his mother that says, I do not mourn like my son because his spirit didn't die, right? Thank you for your letters, right? But your mourning is displaced, this is not, like mourning. And then as it turns out, I keep learning more and more and more and more. Even that poem was not just one poem but 3. It was 3 poems by Sami Al-Qasim, as it turns out. The first column was from Enemy of the Sun, and 2/3 of the second column were from the poem I Defy. Right, and then the third poem was, appropriately enough, it was like a mystic was writing this piece at the same time, was Farewell to Sophia. And the Panthers said, that George Jackson was their martyr. No one uses the language of martyrdom in the United States. The Black Panthers claimed him as a martyr, boldly, loudly, immediately. Their slogan was George Jackson lives. George Jackson lives, right? And the assembling of these 3 pieces of Palestinian poetry, Qasim poetry in particular, right, like actualized that message, like even further. And so this is something that I pieced together in the research that I was doing. And in my own, my first trip to Palestine in May 2014, which is where I first met Nidal, not knowing that he was my neighbor. And that we had been
close by in this area.
Right. He had seen me, but I hadn't seen him, at a talk by Durra bin Wahad, as it turns out. But my first trip there, we went to the Abu Jihad Museum for Prisoner Movement Affairs, right, in Abu Dis in Jerusalem at Al-Quds University. And I went to the prison museum and was floored, just completely overwhelmed. But on that trip, I already had this story, and I shared it with as many people I would get locked in conversation with. And the response was always like amazing, like really, wow. And when I shared the story at the Abu Jihad Museum, the person I shared it with said, "Oh, we should do an exhibit." And from that moment on, I was obsessed with nothing else.
So you curated an exhibit of George Jackson's
Yes.
posters and whatnot,
Exactly.
and the Palestinian, and you recently took that exhibit to Oakland.
Absolutely. So we opened, my third trip I went to launch the exhibit. And so I went in October, which was a very interesting time to be there, right?
In Palestine.
Exactly. One of the slogans and salutations of George Jackson in his second book, Blood in My Eye, he often used the phrase "war to the knife." And so I land back in Palestine, and you have the knifing popular like uprising, and some of the young women who were working with me to translate a few passages from George for the exhibit, they looked at me with like bug eyes and were like, everything we're translating right now is happening like in the street.
Right now.
Yeah.
That's oh my
So,
God, yeah.
so we opened on October 20th, 2015. The exhibit is called George Jackson and the Son of Palestine, and with a symposium, and then I gave like some lectures at universities, at bookstore, and did some amazing press coverage.
And you're going back to Palestine shortly.
I'm going back to Palestine shortly. When we first agreed to do the exhibit, I'm working with Mohammed Jamous, who's the vice director of the Abu Jihad Museum and works at Al-Quds, and also the director of the museum is Fahid Abu al-Hajj, and we shake on it, and it felt like a blood oath, And he already had like international plans. He goes, yes, we should take this to Ireland and South Africa, and a few of us were like, we're going to start with this building. But it's amazing because it's happened in a sense, right? So now we had the second reincarnation of the exhibit in Oakland in May. So like in the last month and a half, which was amazing, and we incorporated like new elements, and so we were able to have Native American work there. We had a new subtitle, which was Colonialist Captivity and Revolutionary Struggle. So we had Native American component of photography set from Native Americans that included a painting by Leonard Peltier, right? And then also like more Palestinian work, and we used a series of infographic posters from the Abu Jihad Museum, which I call the Abu Jihad wing of the Oakland exhibit, and built some events like around that, which was nice. And now also I'm talking to someone who's based in Vienna, Austria, right? As well as local folk here who work with the Boston Palestine Film Festival to think about Boston and Vienna as like the next stops for this work.
Yes. Thank you for that. Tell our audience about the Abu Jihad Center, as most of them won't know what that is.
Okay. So if you go to Al-Quds University, which of course
Al-Quds University
in Abu Dis,
Yes.
right, which is part of
Yes.
Jerusalem,
Yes.
and which the Israelis don't want to be called Al-Quds, right?
Yes,
Right?
because that means Jerusalem.
That means Jerusalem, and that means it's an Arab, university in Jerusalem, like etc. So if you go to that campus, which is like a super militarized campus, I mean, they're just subject to constant like assaults like by soldiers and what have you. And it's interesting the way that rearranges like intellectual life there, right? And yeah, like, so whenever there would be like acts of resistance, reported in the grapevine before it even hit official media, right? There would already be backlash against the university, for example. These are things that I learned, right, in my October trip there, right? I'm used to the police blotter saying, suspect is black and male and was probably wearing a hoodie, right? And what I would hear there, even before it got to the official media, it's like, of course the suspect is, Palestinian and Arab and has to be Muslim, and this is where his village is, and this is what university he goes to or graduated from. It could be 10 years ago, right? And then the university, that they would demolish the home, and then the university would be subject to an attack, and the university might have to be evacuated, proactively, and what have you. So the Abu Jihad Museum is a museum that is, going on a decade. old. It's an amazing structure, like on their campus. An amazing structure. It's absolutely beautiful. It was designed by an architect or a team of architects at Al-Quds. The money was donated by Kuwait, but the upkeep, is going on here locally. And it has about like 4 floors. The 3rd floor is the basis of their archiving prison writings from all across Palestine. And they have artwork, including crafts, as well as like letters from prisoners. A lot of infographic posters to introduce, the question of imprisonment.
What is their main purpose?
Their main purpose is to raise awareness and to preserve like the history of struggle, like around the political incarceration in historic Palestine, and to also work on the
they
writings.
connect with other areas that have political prisoners. I mean, they try to communicate with other
Yes.
peoples who suffer this kind of.
Yes, I mean there seems to be like an intimate sort of connection with like Algeria, which I think is the precedent, right, for such a museum with like 1 million martyrs, for example. And then also there's a lot of like discourse like connecting with Ireland, like at the same time. This exhibit, because it's still a relatively short history of the museum, and this exhibit was the like first international like exhibit like at the museum, but it's hoped that it'll be like a precedent, and then maybe there will be like an Irish.
I gather
exhibit
that
next
it's
year.
been very, your exhibit has been very successful.
I hope so.
No, it has been. Really.
Nidal, tell us about 2 things. One, the work that you're doing in Palestine to improve the life conditions of people, and 2, your connection to the Black community, especially the recent Flint, Michigan issue with water, especially since water is such an issue in Palestine. So tell us of those 2 things. You may, if you like, start with Flint.
Well, my trip to Flint, to Detroit, and to that part of the country is mostly, I was invited to give a talk about the water situation in Palestine, especially in Area C, where Israel used it as a tool, not of oppression, but displace Palestinians in the space. But it was more of education for me to go to this part of the country to learn about what's going on there. And we both were struck by what we have learned about each other. I was really struck by
And this is predominantly a Black community.
It's a Black community. It's just like the system was set to work against them in every aspect, every directions. I was really shocked to see that the system that they use in Detroit, the water system, is very similar to the system that they use in Area C in the West Bank, where they increase the bill of the water, the bill on the people, and if you don't have money to pay the bill, they will shut the water off on the house, which resulted to so many families to move out of their houses. I mean, the whole area went to the city and they said, okay, well, this $500, let's divide it to 8 months, 9 months. I will pay $20 a month, $30 a month. I mean, I cannot pay the whole amount. And the city said no. They shut off the water. And families with children in schools, they moved out of that area. And this triggered to when I presented how Israel uses water as a tool to displace Palestinians in Area C, especially around the Jordan Valley area. It's like, I didn't say anything. I wasn't trying even to find the link.
You didn't know.
I was presenting about
Yeah,
this fact in details, and many
oppression
audience
has
came. Because a
similarities.
lot of them,
right.
they were like, "Oh my God, that is exactly what's happening in Detroit." When I present about the equality of water in refugee camps in regards to infrastructure and the E. coli and the contamination. I wasn't doing the link between Flint and Aida camp. I just was presenting on a fact case on the ground. And it was amazing that the system is almost, one giant person
And the purpose
set
is
the
almost,
system to be worked on two different communities.
And the
or
purpose
eight
is about the
communities
same. They wanted the people to leave.
to leave.
Because that's expensive, expensive real estate.
There is a plan. There's a plan there's a plan behind these acts. Absolutely. What I do in Palestine, my work, I was born and raised in Aida refugee camp, and most of my work is heavily political work. When I moved to the U.S. for the past 3 years, I start noticing that within the Palestinian refugee camps, the human aspect of the struggle is being lost. And the human aspect is very important for each struggle, which is something I learned not only from Palestinian struggle like this Intifada, also from other revolutions and other struggles in the world, where you need to really to figure out a way to support the community, to bring the community together, and you really, overall people, yes, they want to live, they want to survive, but it shouldn't be on the expense of the resistance of the main goal, which is, liberation or defeating the occupation. So practically, I made the decision 3 years ago to switch my work to focus on the human aspect, not as humanitarian or charity. No, is to every single idea, every single suggestion comes from the community in my work. I work based on what people tell me to do right now because I live here. If I live in Aida camp or in Palestine, my work would be completely different. And they told me, we don't want charity, we don't want donations, we don't want, like internationals. We need to figure out a way how to empower the community. And this empowerment, the idea, has to come from the community itself for any project, for any activity, for anything. And this, what I call is the human aspect of the struggle. Yes. So if I want to review the work that I have done in the past with other people here, Palestinians and non-Palestinians in either refugee camp, I would say we managed somehow, or they managed somehow to use every single resources, not to think about food or water or anything only, but to use it how to empower the community to keep going against this huge occupation machine, to the point where other refugee camps were inspired by this approach, not to adopt as the main approach, and this is very important.
But to safeguard the community and
to keep the community, to not force the community to go to other bodies with the Palestinian Authority, which they should support, but they don't. But if they want to support you, you need to compromise. If the occupation wants to support you, you need to compromise. And this is, on a personal level, I don't want to see in a refugee camp. Refugee camp. It's the title, I would say, and this is only my naive opinion, the title of liberation, of return of things. This is the hardcore of this, the history of they call it conflicts, not a conflict with Israel. So it starts from there, it has to end in a positive, in a just way in the refugee camp. And this is the main goal of what I do, really, Elaine.
Yes, and just very quickly, we won't spend a lot of time on it. You've done a lot to help get a clean and sufficient water supply to the people in the Aida refugee camp, and people from Tufts, water engineers, have helped on this, and so and they now have roof gardens and they can grow their own food. And this has become a kind of example to other camps, and that they possibly, and in health and so forth. So I think that what you're doing is very important. What you're doing in terms of helping the human aspect of your.
Not only that, one more thing, Elaine. What's happening right now is the community took over everything, and they are challenging the authorities for the rights. For example, the owner of school, the kids, the rebellion to have these rights from the owner one, the Palestinian authorities, the residents of the camp. It is like autonomy in the camp, if you want to give service, you should give service without ask us to compromise. It's like the Palestinian Authority, the owner one, the occupation. and if you don't want to give it, we'll figure out how to do it, and then we'll keep our principles, and we'll find the way to come after you and ask for these rights and take them from you. And this is what's happening now in Aida refugee camp, and this is where Aida refugee camp told us, you've done enough, move to other locations. You know, but it was a collective work. It was a collective work. Many great people, many great brains joined this this effort. It's not to be a charity or a style effort, but
to cover the cost of bringing this help.
And it has to be, everything has to be, to come from the community. The
Community
idea,
itself.
the ownership, the sustainability, and this is why.
You're a facilitator, they are the owners.
That's true, but you know, I'm in between two places, you know. To be quite honest, to me, part of it also is a guilt. You know, I'm here. It's pretty. I'm not a wealthy person. You know, everybody has struggles, but
Yes.
compared to people who live there, I'm in a comfortable position here. And to think about, like, I just paid taxes, and part of my taxes will be used to tear gas my family in the camp and my friends and the people that I grow up in. So part of it is a duty, is a guilt that I have to do something to help them. And this is in a personal level, but also it's the issue of empowerment and keeping the community
Right.
connected in one body as well.
I think about the same thing when I'm in Palestine, that if I get shot by a soldier, I would have paid for like the bullet that kills me.
That's
That's a constant
point.
irony.
Yeah.
Well, let me also just say quickly that you do have an organization with which you work
Yeah.
called 143, and we'll put up an address for that organization, and people who donate to it can be assured that all that money is going to help empower
That's
people there. So we will show that address, and people should feel free to donate. Before we close, I would like each of you to give us a final word, something you would like to say that we haven't talked about already. So we'll start with Greg.
What do I want to say? So, well, I'm looking forward to continuing the work that started with this one project that you just asked me to discuss, right? So for me, that was just like a beginning to also like help shift the framework by which we try to understand things. So I was talking about the settler myths, the national myths, right? And the myths rooted like in the slave state that becomes like the U.S. empire, and how they stop us from using like the language of clarity, right? And recognizing and properly understanding, you know, the realities that we're struggling against, right? And so this is why I would turn to George Jackson. This is why I would go to Palestine and highlight this connection ultimately. And this is why I want to go further like with that work and think about what it means to think about the issue of captivity inside and outside of prisons, like under colonial empires in a world, a modern world created out of slavery at the same time. And so like, in order to understand that myself, in order to reorient some of our like political like objectives, right, I want to continue that particular work so it can be a shared understanding with a new kind of language to be shared as well.
Well, I wish you great luck, and I know that you will be very productive, and we look forward to your new book.
Thank you.
And to welcome you back once you come back from Palestine. Nidal, is there something you would like to?
I would like to say, since I know that many Arabs and Palestinians and many people who are interested in this cause watch and follow Arabic Hours closely, that George Jackson, the son of Palestine, is coming to Boston. It's going to be as the opening of the Boston Palestine Film Festival. So put this in your calendar. It's a great exhibition.
Yes.
And it's a great education tool and object. And I want to thank Elaine. Thank you for this ongoing
discussion.
Discussion
We will,
about these topics, really.
Yes.
and we'll have you both back again. Thank you both for coming today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Right.
Thank you, Elaine, and thank you to our guests, Greg Thomas and Nidal Al-Azraq. To donate for 143, please visit the website at www.143.org/donate.
You are watching the Arabic Hour, a program of news, views, culture, cuisine, and the Arab American experience. To view today's program or any previous programs, log on to our website at www.arabichour.org.
That's all the time that we have for today. Thank you so much for joining us. On behalf of all of the volunteer staff here at the Arabic Hour, this is Ghanwa Hakim wishing you a pleasant week.
The Arabic Hour has been brought to you in part by the William G. Abdullah Memorial Library, a resource center for information and education on the Arab American experience. The American Arabic Benevolent Association, ABA, an umbrella association for community endeavors. The Nicholas G. Barham Veterans Association and Ladies Auxiliary, providing veteran services, scholarships with community pride. And by our members as well as contributions from viewers like you.